Episode 38 of the podcast. In the first part, we're going to talk about the opposition reflex and how that affects dogs at home, in the vet's office, and in grooming. And in the second part, we're going to talk about some of the safety equipment available to us. You're listening to the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Chrissy Neumeier Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, certified behavior consultant for canines, certified professional dog trainer, and the owner of Happy Critters in Nashua, New Hampshire. And this, my friends and colleagues, is where grooming and training meet. Maybe you're at home and you're trying to hold onto your dog's paw and you're trying to wipe something off and they're pulling away from you, and the harder you pull, they just keep pulling away from you. Or you've got a dog in the tub and they keep putting their body up against the side of the tub and you're trying to pull them away and they keep pressing further into the tub and they're pressing into your hand, and God, won't they stop, right? And I think that we all have these experiences with dogs, and it's really frustrating, and it's one of the ways that we kind of end up in conflict. But let me tell you about the opposition reflex. So many years ago, I heard about the opposition reflex, and just so much kicked into place for me. So when we find ourselves working with a dog and we have to hold part of their body and they start pulling away, or we hold on tighter, we're actually triggering the opposition reflex. When someone or something pulls on a dog, they pull away. If someone or something pushes on a dog, they push back. And we often see this as a dog who is choosing to fight against us. That's when we start getting into all those labels and not observations. That's when we start coming up with things like stubborn, willful, bossy. But if we look at the opposition reflex, the behavior that we're observing, that when we push, they push back. When we pull, they pull away. That's predictable now, and that's preventable, and we can work around that, because if we know that that's just part of being a dog, right? That they're reacting like they're caught in a trap, that they don't really have a choice over that. So then we can look at it and say, all right, how am I going to prevent this situation where you feel like you need to press into me or pull against me? So I want you to think about observing the behavior. Right? Every dog's an individual, and we're looking at what we see. And what we see, if we hold a foot, I want you to start be looking for that. Right? Is that dog going to pull it away from me? Probably, right? Um, One of the things that I hear pretty often, especially with groomers, but owners do this a lot. I heard it a lot when I was a vet tech too. But one of the things I hear pretty often is to hold on until they're done fighting, right? Like you need to win this. You need to hold on, and they'll calm down. And I understand where you're coming from, right? I think that I've been there plenty of times myself where you're like, I'm just going to be calm and I'm just going to hold on to this until they stop pulling. However, it's a misguided attempt to address one of those labels, right? You're still in the mindset of this dog is being stubborn or willful or bossy, or this dog is making a choice about struggling against you when it's their nature to struggle against it. So a dog with a lot of experience can be taught not to push into pressure or pull against pulling. But for most dogs, they don't have that kind of background. So they're going to go with their instinct set, right? It makes more sense if we start looking at the behavior instead of wanting to end that pulling, that stubborn willing and willfulness and bossiness, by not giving in or winning. Do you see what I'm talking about with this labeling that we do? When we know that they really don't choose to pull against when we pull. It's just kind of hardwired. And you know what? People do it to some extent too. If you pull someone's arm, I bet they pull back. In fact, I do this with my customers. It's one of the things that I'll show them with leash work and stuff. I'll have them hold one end of a leash and I hold the other end of the leash, and I'm like, okay, and I'm pulling back and forth with them, and we're just pulling on each other back and forth. And I'm like, as soon as I stop, interesting things happen because they feel the need to pull. If someone's pulling, we pull back. If someone's pressing, the dog presses back. So if we start looking at it as a behavior, now we have some solution sets. So one of the things I like to do, if I am holding a paw and a dog starts pulling away from me, is that I'll try to reach up with the other hand, even if it means putting my tool down, putting the scissors on the counter. I don't put scissors on my table. Well, okay. I try not to put scissors on my table because I've had too many scissors hit the floor. But set the tool down, reach over with your other hand, and kind of press the back end of their arm. Kind of pull that arm back to you, right? Help them to recenter, like pull them a little bit closer to you, and it really helps a lot. They're not simply moving away from you. They get the chance to feel like, oh, my paw is not moving. They're not pulling against me. We don't have to let go, right? I'm not saying that, oh, if you pull against them, they pull back. So just let go, right? Um, if you're a listener to the podcast, you know I'm not real keen on that technique. Unless you think there's something dangerous happening or a dog is like just really, really scared. But generally, calm them down in your hand. But if you can reach over and kind of help them, like, relax into both hands and realize that you're not pulling on them, yanking on them, they're not caught in a bear trap, then you have a way to help them calm down, and you can gently pull that paw towards you again, or reposition that paw closer, or ask them to bring their paw closer. Just be thinking that it's not about being willful. It's not about being upset. It's not stubborn or bossy or any of those other things that I think we tend to look at. It's more about this response to pressure. And it's part of what dogs do when they are walking on a leash, which in a grooming setting, we need to be aware of that, because if the dogs are dogs that pull an awful lot on leash, which is such a common problem, we're going to find that they pull a lot more when they're on a grooming loop or when we have them in the tub. That this is just part of the way they interact daily with their owner, or interact on leash with their owner. If they don't do leashes daily, they still have this sense of on a loop, and I pull against that. I mean, duh, everybody does that, right? So we need to kind of think about, this is a natural thing that they're doing. They don't know any better. And remember that we're observing a behavior, and a natural behavior. Then we can kind of step back and go, all right, I'm going to step back. What do I see? I see a dog who felt pressure and moved against the pressure, the opposition reflex. So, how can I help them not feel pressure? That's a good way, right? How can I help them? Um, let's say the bathtub example, the dog that's pressed their bum into the side of the bathtub and you're trying to pull them away and pull them away. When I first learned about the opposition reflex, it was back when I was still doing the occasional large dog as house call. So I'm kneeling on the floor next to a bathtub, which is backbreaking. And the standard poodle just kept leaning her backside up against the wall, and I'm trying to pull her back, and she's pulling against my hand and trying to push herself against the wall. So I put my hand on my side of her and pressed into it, and she pressed into my hand away from the wall. So I'm not sure how well that's relating verbally without seeing what I'm talking about, but I pressed in the I pressed close to her so that she'd move toward me. She'd move into my hand by giving her some guidance and some support, and I got her away from the wall that way. And I remember for me, it was a big aha moment. Like, oh, the opposition reflex. She's not intentionally trying to do this. She's not trying to make my day hard. She's just doing what she does. And it actually helped a lot, because I could get my hand on her and just kind of press her into where I wanted her to be, because she would move into my hand if I pressed my hand. Does that make sense? It's one of the ways that we can help a dog, if we know what to expect. If we know, if we press, they're going to press back. If we pull, they're going to pull away. It's something that we can predict and we can use. So sometimes if a dog is trying to pull away from me, and they've got their bum trying to slide off the table away from you, groomers know what I'm talking about, like the little wiggly worm that wants to slide away. Sometimes if you reach up and kind of press into their chest and give them a little bit of stability, it's not a hard push. It's more like a, hey, press into this. You got this, man. And sometimes they move towards your hand, and they relax a little bit. Um, I don't know if any of you guys are horse people, but it's not necessarily the leg that you push them with when you're riding. Like there's two legs working there. So we can think about pressure, and we can think about how we're going to help them feel comfortable with the kind of pressure that we use, and that it shouldn't be a whole lot of pressure. There are times where we're picking a foot up or we're holding a foot for a nail trim, maybe a back foot, and they start thinking they're going to pull that foot back, or we've got them by an ear. And if we lift the ear and they start thinking they need to move away, but we really shouldn't be pulling on them a lot. And if we think about it as, all right, well, now we have this additional reason to not do a whole lot of pulling or pressing because the dog doesn't necessarily get it. The dog doesn't necessarily understand that we're trying to position them. So the opposition reflex is pretty fascinating. And for many of us, it can help us in our day to day grooming, our day to day at home, trying to put eardrops in a dog's ear, or picking up their feet, or toweling them off, or cleaning bums. Oh, that's another good one. You're trying to lift a little dog's tail. I have a customer with a Yorkie who's got that tiny, tiny Yorkie tail. And I had to teach her, like, put your finger under that tail and just gently, like, because he's gonna press. If you press into it, he's pressing it down. You can kind of gently relax him, get that little tail up so you can clean his bum, because it's this tiny, tiny little area. But she didn't realize that her pressing was making him press harder, and not necessarily because he's just being ornery.
If you're enjoying my podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we have available to us. Some of these tools are safety equipment. So if we find ourselves in a bind, if we find ourselves with a need to keep everybody safe, we've got some tools. Some of them I would only use in an emergency, but emergencies happen, and we should have these if we're professionals, and we should have some idea of how to use them. So let's talk about some of our equipment. I was a little bit surprised that another trainer didn't realize that most groomers are using grooming tables. I wouldn't have thought of those as listing them as equipment, but here we are. So, a grooming table is a little bit different than the vet table. The grooming table, for owners and for other animal pros out there, the grooming table usually has a rubber mat on top, has a grooming arm. So it has a place to attach a grooming loop, which is basically putting them on leash while they're on a table. It's not, um, I know sometimes people call it a noose, but we don't use that term anymore because people literally think we're hanging their dog if we tell them we're putting them on a noose, right? I mean, that's just bad PR. It's a grooming loop. It's basically leashing them so that they don't just fly off our table, so they don't jump off. And most dogs, actually, I find, will lean into it a little bit. It's almost like having a railing if you're up high and you just want something to kind of hold on to. So, tables, grooming arms, and grooming loops, pretty standard equipment. I know a lot of groomers who choose to not use grooming loops at all, which is, I mean, I get it. There are some dogs I don't use them with either, especially if I can teach them from the very beginning to not need them for some of these smaller breeds that have trachea problems. But if you do have a dog with a trachea problem or a neck problem, you can also put that grooming loop with their head and one of their front legs through it. So it's actually kind of going in between their front legs, and we can avoid having any sort of pulling on their neck. But tables and grooming loops, definitely part of our equipment that we can have. There's also a lip system, or it's almost like an additional grooming loop that you can put underneath their belly. You can put added support across their body. Sometimes it looks almost like a hammock with little holes that you can put legs through. um, I'm going to say that I think that some people have really great experiences with those with some of the older dogs who simply have trouble standing up. And it can help support the weight of a dog with health issues, or a dog with mobility issues. As a restraint for a dog who is scared or having a behavior problem, I see it as a possible stress, right? Like, it's not really going to teach them that everything is safe. It's going to be a little bit more scary because now they are really closed in, like now they're kind of tied up, and twisted in, and we're just working on feet that are dangling. I could see it being pretty terrifying for a dog who is having a behavior problem that requires training versus a dog who has a health problem and needs some added stability. Because I do know, like I've known a couple of dogs that actually felt really comfortable in one of those. Like, oh, good. I don't have to worry about standing. Some of those Cocker Spaniels as they get older that are almost like trying to groom a water balloon. you know so anyway, the those systems, the variety of ways that we can use our grooming loops and ties. Sometimes it's a matter of like a little bit of more support underneath the belly with there are some little stand type supports, or pool noodles sometimes get used for the tiny dogs. But there are a lot of ways that we can help a dog be supported while they're on the table. So let's also talk about muzzles. The face mitten. So muzzles get a bad reputation. The fact is that if we need to feel safe, or if we're trying to help a dog feel safe who has a history of biting at us, or has a history of air snaps, things like that, I find that putting on a face mitten, and I usually refer to it as a face mitten. I'm a house call groomer, and it helps owners feel better about it, because really, doesn't hurt. It's not a big deal. But if we put it on and are just as mindful about how gentle we are, how calm and approachable we are, like, hey, buddy, I'm just trying to help you. And if we're still thinking about keeping that dog calm, comfortable, and cooperative, for many dogs, I find that having the muzzle on helps them to kind of focus in on the fact that everyone sounds really, really nice. No one has hurt them. Nothing hurts, because now we've taken away that option to bite at us, and we're continuing to be just as cautious and gentle as we were before. When I see muzzles have problems is when the muzzle comes out and that has turned into the signal that we're going to do whatever we want to do to you right now. And in my past, I've definitely was not always a positive reinforcement trainer. I definitely have pushed dogs and forced dogs into stuff. And the fact is that when you kind of get a muzzle on and get it done, right? What you create is a dog who's not going to let you get the muzzle on, right? Like the muzzle becomes the precursor to, oh, we doing that again, you know? Whereas if we put a muzzle on to a dog who is relaxed, or still relaxed, not yet fighting with us, and help them remain calm, take it off, put it on, take it off, put it on, practice it with stuff that they're comfortable with, right? Then we can have a tool that can be handy. In fact, I know a couple of my dogs that I work with that um, if something startles them, their response is kind of out of their control, and their response is not a nice little nip. I would expect a full depth bite if I really scared them, or if something hurt. Like if a toe got twisted or something, like I would expect a full on bite. So yes, they wear a muzzle. And you know what? They're actually really friendly with me, and they don't mind the muzzle, because the muzzle hasn't become the I'm going to force you into it. And along with the muzzle, I find the same thing happens when we use things like leather gloves. Now, there's a time when leather gloves can be helpful. I would say more in a veterinary setting than a grooming setting. Because what happens is that if we have a leather glove, like one of those big thick gloves, and we start thinking like, okay, good, now I'm not going to get hurt while I'm handling this dog, but they're still seeing a hand. I want you to think that if they make contact with that glove and it doesn't affect you, they're going to try harder. Does that make sense? Be thinking about that. Like, we're literally teaching them to bite harder. And that's a terrible message. Like, oh, we don't want that message. Now, if you feel the need to put on gloves, be thinking that that should be an emergency type case. And if you feel the need to put on gloves, if you actually like use a towel or something over it, then they're not seeing your hand. They're just thinking that something big is coming at them. All right. I use towels a lot. Sometimes a towel is just like this big wall of fluff, and you can wrap them up a little bit and help them feel calm. But if you're using a glove, put it under a towel. Like, have a towel there too, so that they're not seeing a hand, a human hand, that somehow like needs to be bitten harder. That's not a good message. Right? And also, again, that's really kind of an emergency thing. That shouldn't be I need to get this mat, right? That should be more of a, oh my God, this dog is injured, like did something and I need to stop the bleeding and not get hurt, right? This is kind of vet stuff, not necessarily on a grooming table, and certainly not I need to get these nails done. I don't think that that's something that we should be pushing a dog so hard on that we need to turn to things like leather gloves. um, no, I got to say, there's also the groomer's helper, and I kind of it probably sounded like I talked about that one when I was talking about grooming loops and like additional grooming arms and grooming loops. But the groomer's helper gives you a second loop to almost be like cross ties. So one grooming arm, I want you to picture this. You've got one grooming arm and the dog's loop goes to the top of the grooming arm, and a groomer's helper brings it off to the side to the grooming arm, to the side of the grooming arm, or directly in front of the dog. So it keeps a dog from being able to do a full circle. And if we're able to help a dog remain calm, comfortable, and cooperative, if we're able to help them relax, we can also have that little bit of feeling like I can be calm myself because I know how far this dog can reach. Because we've also talked about how the human has to feel calm, confident, like we need to feel like we're in charge and that this is okay. And that helps a dog be calm too. So if we're aware that, all right, I am going to set up some safety equipment so that I know I'm not in reach should this dog go beyond what they can handle or have a very dramatic response that I did not expect. So those are some of the tools that we have available to us. Now, one more I'm going to mention. So the rabies poll. There is a point where a dog might be in a cage and just will not come out. And in that case, I usually would say, call the owner. But I have been there a couple times where a dog wouldn't come out for an owner either. And so there are times where having something that's a leash on a big stick, which is what a rabies pole is, right? Leash on a big stick. Um, Attach them to it and pull them out. It's not pretty. It's not something I would recommend. It's a last ditch effort. However, if you have a dog that has trouble coming out of crates, there are a couple of things that you can do. A Kennel that you can pull apart and take the top off. For a lot of dogs, totally diffuses that. Like, oh, I have no roof. Oh, hi, and you can get a slip lead over and coax them out. But the rabies pole is a tool that could be used in an emergency, not part of the regular, like, you know, Toby's in again, get the rabies pole. Like we don't want to have to do that with any dog on any sort of a regular basis. Now, groomers, I will say, if you find yourself in a situation where an owner's there and no one can get that dog out of a crate, sometimes you can use a grooming arm with a slip lead on the end and use that as like a rabies pole and just kind of like, okay, can I get this over your head and pull you back out? So, but these are some of the tools that are available to us as safety equipment. And I wouldn't rule out any of them, just to have a mindfulness that our goal is to keep a dog calm, comfortable, and cooperative. And any tools that we're using should be promoting calm, comfortable, and cooperative, or damage control, safety, in the moment, emergency type use. So be thinking about some of these tools and the way that we use them. The weekly action step this week is to play around with the opposition reflex. See what happens. Be aware that when you're holding a foot, if a dog pulls away and you pull back, that they're going to pull more. Or if you press into their hip to try to get them to press into your hand, have fun with it. And actually go ahead and play with people too. See what your family and friends do. You might find it very enlightening, but explore this week and see how it goes. Everybody have a great week and stay curious.
If you'd like to talk to me, you can find me through my grooming and training business, happycrittersdogtraining.com, my email, chrissy@happycritters.net, and through the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page. And we have these awesome devices in our pockets that allow us to do live video with each other. I can help you with the dog on your table. We can set up live lessons, and you may be surprised at how much we can get accomplished together via video.